Anguilla, 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 Anguilla. Welcome to my lovely island, Anguilla.
Well, Wall Blake House, the earliest origins of it go back to the 1670s when it was owned by a man called Valentine Blake. Valentine Blake was called by his friends, what do we call Valentine Banks? Val Banks, right? So the nickname of Valentine is Val. Now, have you ever heard Blowing Point people saying that they're going to the Valley? And they feel very good? So what was Val Blake called? He was called Val Blake. Yes? So Val Blake morphed into Wall Blake eventually. In the early period, Wall Blake was just a poor little cotton plantation like everywhere else. Then it became a sugar plantation. I don't know if you know that you can go behind Wall Blake House and look at the sugar mill and the sugar works. So it got a little money. And they built a big house, probably in the 1790s. A big house was built there, a real plantation house. One or two were built around the island. The biggest and the best of all was the Richardson Plantation House in the Valley. The Valley was a big estate. It consisted of Upper Quarter, North Valley, South Valley, and Wall Blake and Stacia Valley. That appears to have been the original Valley plantation, which was owned by the plantation owner who lived in Wall Blake. But then it was divided up and the Valley became a separate plantation. Upper Quarter became known as the Quarter. It seems to have been divided into four pieces: North Valley, South Valley, Upper Quarter, and Stacia Valley. Well, Stacia Valley became Wall Blake Plantation, and the Valley was the Valley Plantation. The Richardson family built a huge house at Lansome Bowl, where we now have Carnival Village, and we all know what happened to that. Do you remember what happened to it?
Yeah, they burned it down.
The revolutionaries burned it down when Mr. Byron was the warden in 1967, during the time of the revolution. They burnt it down and he had to flee, jump out the window in his pajamas. Lost all of his personal possessions. But the house burned down and it was subsequently knocked down and turned into Carnival Village, where we have it today. But that was a huge plantation house. I would, judging from the pictures, because I can only judge from the pictures, it was at least 5 or 6 times as big as Wall Blake House.
I wonder where my Tommy gone, Tom gone away. My Tommy gone, the world don't know, Tom gone away. I wonder where my Tommy gone, Tom gone away. My Tommy gone, the world don't know, Tom gone away. I wonder where my...
One of the unique things about Anguilla is the fact that its national sport is boat racing. What's strange about that is that in most Caribbean, in fact in all English-speaking Caribbean islands, the national sport is cricket. The reason for that is Anguilla's heavy reliance when it was very, very, very poor on the sea and what boats could provide, both in terms of transportation to other islands and trade with other islands, and also with fishing. So because Anguilla was so poor and had so few resources, there was a preponderant reliance on things that occurred with the sea. And one of those occurrences had to do with the salt trade that Anguilla had. Anguilla, because it had salt ponds and it only had 35 inches of rainfall per annum, it could produce salt. And the Nova Scotians, who sold a lot of salt fish to the plantations of the Caribbean, came to Anguilla to get their salt to take back to salt the codfish. And in doing so, there was a transfer of technology between Nova Scotia and Anguilla in the art of shipbuilding, which lasted for quite a few years and did a lot to improve the technology that we used on the island to build boats. Then the other occurrence was Anguillians having to go overseas to work in the cane fields of the Dominican Republic. And when that happened, the boats used to go down in convoy all together, and they would come back in convoy all together. And that generated the natural instinct in all human society of a competition. And racing began between the schooners that took these men to and fro to Santo Domingo. That engendered in the smaller boats, the fishing boats and the smuggling boats, an opportunity to race and compete with each other. Then we had the smuggling during the day and get back quickly at night and in secret to land their contraband cargoes of alcohol, which was a very important part too of our history, in that we were so poor we had to pay people to labor. The return for your effort was in food and drink. Well, drink had to be alcohol, and alcohol was very expensive because in those days the British Empire charged a very, very high duty on alcohol. And out of those all those factors, along with the need for sport, the need for entertainment, the need for competition between communities, the sport of boat racing evolved. And it is still with us. It is a very unique type of boat. It's not very modern in its layout. It's actually very, very, very old, even though the boat could be built this year. The techniques used in sailing and the rig of the boat is quite old, over 300 years old. And that has made boat racing our national sport.
The ponds in Anguilla, mainly the Road Pond, and then the Western Pond, and a little in Long Pond. They were the three ponds that made salt. But the Road Pond produced most of it, 90% of it. The pond produced the salt naturally. The ground is the sandbar, and when the tide is high, the water seeps through. And if there's nothing to prevent it going into the pond, it will go right into the pond. So in the very early days, on the days of the Arawaks, there was no business with the salt industry, no dams built, so the seawater would seep in. And then that seawater would evaporate over time, and over years, then it could produce quite a bit of salt. So that is the origin of it. The first salt that was sent out of Anguilla was taken out by Arawaks or Amerindians in maybe hundreds centuries ago. They came here mainly from Dominica, and Dominica does not produce any salt, so salt was a valuable commodity for them. And these big canoes, like the one that came here last year, they came in those canoes, and they would take salt back to Dominica. In more recent years, schooners and sloops from Anguilla they'd buy salt here and take it through the island, selling it as they go. to Montserrat, to Dominica, to St. Lucia's and Western Grenada. And then Trinidad bought a lot years later. Oh yes, the Rays. The Rays built these dams, and they started producing salt on a business scale, and they could produce quite a bit of salt. And it was sold, schooners and sloops from Anguilla would buy it at first, but then eventually, as the pond became more cultivated, they did more things to prevent the seawater from going, the rainwater from going into the pond. They could produce more salt, and then had to look for markets from abroad. And the biggest market was in Trinidad. And originally, Trinidad bought coarse salt, Guyana too. They bought coarse salt, which was used mainly as an additive for animal feed for the cattle and mules that worked in the cane fields. When they work all day in the cane fields, these animals perspire a lot, and they could lose a lot of weight, and they lose the salt in the body. If you didn't have a salt additive, they would die. So salt, a lot of salt from Anguilla was taken there. Most of it, in fact, was taken to Trinidad and Guyana. Once they stopped using once the tractor came into being, they stopped using the mules and cattle, steer. Then, fortunately for us, they had to produce more diesel fuel and more gasoline too. Anyway, they in Trinidad, they had to speed up the production of gasoline and diesel fuel, jet fuel, and so on. And the way it was done was that, well, let me say this, that the crude oil, when it's pumped up from the sea or from the deep wells, would have salt water in it. Small amounts, but nevertheless some. And when the oil was distilled, the water was boiled. It turned into steam. To purify the water, to purify the gasoline or the oil, whichever it was, they had to fill tanks with it and let the water settle out. But in a big tank, it could take 3 weeks for all the water to settle out. Until they hit on the idea that since the condensed steam was water, what they did was fill a tank full of salt, pump the hot oil as it came from the distillery into that tank. The water in the salt, the water and the oil dissolved the salt, and the water became much heavier, and it would settle out in a matter of days rather than weeks. Made a big difference to the quick throughput of from crude oil to exported oil.
Yes, brothers. Tonight we're going to make sure that nobody come in here. We have suffered enough in this country. We will not suffer anymore. Robert, take everything that been coming here for we and God St. Kitts and Nevis, build up. We got nothing.
That's right.
The look stop blinding you. Not even a light to see where you're going tonight. But now if you told look my foot, every toenail I got lick out.
That's
He
right.
ain't coming here.
I agree with you.
And we gonna make sure tonight,
Not tonight.
and every night, we gonna mine here. Nobody ain't coming in here.
We can get all the beaches. All.
Exactly.
The Anguilla Revolution came about because the people in Anguilla felt that we were very much neglected by the central government in St. Kitts. During 1967 and before, Anguilla had no electricity, no telephone. There was one line between the hospital and one of the out district. At East End, one home conducted a line. So if there was an emergency in East End, you had to go to that home in Mount Fortune to get a connection to the hospital, telling them that the patient or the police station. The schools, they were just one room. There was one secondary school on the island, and limited with how many kids they could take in, children, how many children could attend. There were no running water supply. A lot of privy, and I say privy, they were outdoor toilets, and many people use what we call the bush. And we were beginning to travel to other islands. Anguillans were beginning to travel to other islands. And we also had Anguillans that went to England, St. Thomas, St. Martin, other island countries. And they knew what development was. They knew what it was to have running water, indoor toilets, you know. So when they returned back home and realized that Anguilla was still under the same conditions that they left, a group of them decided that something had to be done. Fortunately for those persons, men like Atlin Harrigan, John Rogers, Mr. Ronald Webster, they banded themselves together, right, to decide, you know, what could be done to improve the conditions in Anguilla. Well, fortunately for them, that Mr. Peter Adams, who was then Anguilla's representative in St. Kitts, he was elected by the people in Anguilla to represent Anguilla in St. Kitts legislature. He got he was given a document informing him that the St. Kitts government was about to become a statehood within the British Parliament. And that statehood was like self-government in St. Kitts. And Anguilla, St. Kitts, Nevis and Anguilla were going to become a part of that. Well, Mr. Peter Adams allowed Atlin Harrigan to get hold of that paper. And that is what set the revolution going. These men got together and they said, under no conditions will Anguilla go into statehood with the St. Kitts government.
They were there because they were preparing us to go
Take
into
part
this
of
is
the
one of
statehood.
the activities, like a Queen show, for us to say that we were involved in wanted statehood. So the young men and with the leaders, they went down there and they started to
They disrupted.
disrupt the Queen show. So that, because they say we are not going with St. Kitts within the statehood, so no Queen show going on. And they started to revolt. Or they started their revolution then. Yes. They had, after that we had a demonstration, we had to carry a coffin, remember? We had to carry a coffin. All that was during the time for statehood, with it, you know, we carried a coffin because they say if you go, if you join, then we'd be dead. So they carried a coffin saying Anguilla is dead.
Very,
Like
very
it'd be
bracha.
buried today.
Winston Harrigan was the one that came up with the idea about having the coffin.
Oh, it was Winston. I
Yeah.
didn't know, but I remember going.
Yeah. You remember that that coffin, who that coffin was?
Virginia.
Yeah, there was a young lady that was very sick, and so the coffin was Winston
already-
built and
Yeah.
yeah. So he decided that we must decide that Anguilla do not want to be with statehood. We do not want bracha, and you must bury bracha. So planned this. They planned
This
the
demonstration.
demonstration, and as usual, from Island Harbor down to Sandy Hill, they had a truck running through the island, and because our parents were so involved in what was happening, they did not want. They were, you know, they
were kind of aged.
aged. So they ensured that we, the younger ones that were home at the time, must be part of the demonstration. So like I say, we had someone that made those placards for us every year, every day that we had to go. Mr. Petty, Calvin Petty, made the placards. And Narine and myself would always be
Go on the truck.
on the truck or the pickup, whichever one they were. I remember that we all gathered down by the Farrington there by the crossroad by John.
Where they have the big building now.
Yeah.
We used to meet there, and then from there we used to go down,
Walk
all the way down. And we used to,
with our placards.
and we used to sing a song.
We're out to build a new Anguilla.
Anguilla.
This whole wide world, Anguilla's the only place for me. This land is ours, but we love to share. Everyone is welcome here. Leave your troubles and worries